I'm Ananya. I am studying at UAL currently, and a fun fact about me is that I was lost as a kid when I was 3. I think I followed an elephant at some point, and then my mom and dad were panicking, and they finally found me. And yeah, I just thought it's a funny story to share.
No, that's a very interesting story. Where exactly was this, like geographically, which city or which place was this where this happened?
So it's in the south of India. It's a place called Salem. I don't know if you know. It was my first time going to the city. So I think we never went back for like 5, 6 years at least because we were so traumatized by what happened. I think I obviously didn't have a lot of memory of it, but my parents were like really traumatized, so we didn't go back for like 5, 6 years. And when we finally went back, we actually went to the place where I got lost, and it was just yeah, it was a funny moment.
To formally introduce you to our listeners, that's Ananya Chordia. She's a third and final year student at UAL, so the University of Arts London in central London, which I think is one of the places to be, where she's pursuing her degree in film and television. Today, I think we'll be chatting more about choices she's made, the lessons she's learned along the way, as well as I'm sure there'll be like tons of nuggets of insight and wisdom and advice for any high schoolers listening about to jump onto this like new roller coaster of their life that we call like university. So welcome to Uni Unveiled. I'm your host Arya Darod. I'm currently studying at Minerva University. Welcome, Ananya. Thank you for joining me today. Excited to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. I think the first thing we should sort of clear the air about is the mic. And so I'm supposed to be the podcaster. Why do you have a mic there?
So I also do podcasting. I started about a year and a half ago. So my podcast is called The Daily Dose of A. And the main goal, or like the main thing, or the reason that I started my podcast is kind of very similar to yours, where I found a lot of people just unhappy with the lives that they led, and they were kind of following things that they really weren't interested in. And they were just doing it because maybe their parents told them to do so, or maybe they just had like friends who were doing the same thing. And I think something that's important and something that we should all learn is to like chase our dreams, no matter how hard they might seem. And I think that was kind of the reason that I started my podcast, just to inspire people to kind of chase their dreams and do what they actually love.
Hmm. How does it feel to be in the guest seat for a change today?
It's interesting. I don't know. I've done a few collabs with different podcasters, but I think this is the first one where I'm kind of being interviewed of sorts and not really like a collab per se. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's interesting.
Speaking about like dreams and professional goals, and I'm sure you've interviewed a lot of people on your podcast who are actually pursuing professional dreams or sort of living a life like that. And I'm sure that is inspiring for listeners. Let's talk about you personally. Is there a specific like professional dream which you're currently pursuing?
Yes, so I'm studying film and television, and I think I wouldn't say that was something I wanted to do since I was a kid. I think I always knew I wanted to do something more creative, even though I really loved studying, and I think you could call me sort of a nerd when I was in school. Um, I just, I don't know, I think I felt really inspired or just really creatively fulfilled when I did anything, any sort of creative thing. And I think along the way, I realized a 9 to 5 is something that would never be my my ideal in a way. So the reason that I kind of went into filmmaking, I used to love watching a lot of movies. I used to love like being transported to a different world. But I think that's said for most people. Everyone loves watching movies. Everyone loves a little break from reality.
Mhm.
But what I think was different was I always wondered how things were made. So whenever I would watch a film, I would always kind of be like, how did they do this? I think from a young age, I was very curious to understand what is like the behind the scenes of how a movie is made. And I think that was kind of the thing that sparked my interest. And as I started growing up, I sort of lost that and I went a completely different way. I started designing and I was going into like design as something that I really wanted to do. I still kind of do it on the side. We'll talk about that later. But yeah, I started during lockdown. I think that was the turning point for me because I had a lot more free time. I found this filmmaking course. And my cousin, who is a photographer, both of us were kind of sitting and seeing this filmmaking course. And we were like, okay, why don't we just do this? Like, it'll be a fun little course. And we both started to do it. And we kind of, like, we were doing it very religiously. We were doing all the work that they sent. And, like, we were really invested in it. And I think that's the point where I was like, this is so fun. Like, I really like it. And I think it's something that I could actually consider as something like a career for me. And yeah, I think that's how it kind of started. And then, yeah, I went into it more and more as the years progressed.
Okay. That was sort of your specific example. I'll talk a bit about my relationship with film, and then
Yeah.
we'll try and make your specific example a bit more general for someone listening who potentially is considering like doing a film major and getting into a filmmaking career. And there was a point when I was like maybe in 9th, 10th grade where I really wanted to like do film at university and actually get into Hollywood, do screenwriting and directing. Um, Maybe around the beginning of 11th, after like doing a few courses, experimenting a bit with sort of videography and script writing, I realized that, and this is actually true of many people, not just myself, that I just really love watching movies, but I'm not as dedicated to like actually putting in the hours and grind work and actually making them because the
Yeah.
final product looks very fancy. It's even for a podcast, like the final product looks very fancy. There's a lot of sort of work which is not as enjoyable, a lot more tedious about
Yeah.
making a podcast and making a film. And so that was my point where I said, this is not something I want to get into. I don't think I can commit to this for many, many years. Let's do something more quote unquote traditional. So now I'm doing sort of economics and psychology.
Yeah.
And this might be a phase which many listeners are in. Someone who's in 9th, 10th, 11th, loves watching movies, has still not really done a deep dive into like making them and how they are made. For someone who currently like loves watching movies, thinks that maybe a film major in university is the thing for them. What kind of activities do you think they specifically should be working on and investing in to actually like make that final choice? Do they want to do film
Right.
or do they want to just be like a film nerd and like do something else in college?
That's really interesting because I think a lot of people that I talk to have mentioned that at some point in their life they've wanted to be a filmmaker and wanted to get into filmmaking. I think we see we consume so much of like films and everyone I think is exposed to it in a big way and we see the final product and you're right, like it looks very glamorous and it looks very fun. There's a lot more that goes into it and I think that someone who is probably interested in it but not quite sure should definitely do a course on filmmaking, understand what are the actual components to making a film because I feel like a lot of people don't even know. They just think that there's a director and the actors,
Hmm.
but there's a lot more. There's so much. It's a whole world. So I think even if you just start maybe researching, if you have access to doing a course, that would be great. And I think it's a good way to really see if that's something you're interested in. If you perhaps enjoy the course, I think second step to take before you actually decide to do a film major is doing an internship at a
Hmm.
film production house, which is something I did before I started film school. Because film school is very, very focused. And I think once you start school, you kind of go into that. And maybe there are not many more options that you can do after doing a film major. Obviously, like the the world is your oyster and you can like do whatever you want after you come out of it. But I think if you're spending so much time and money in a film major, you should be really sure before you go into it. So doing an internship is something that I'd really recommend because even though maybe you've enjoyed the course and you like doing it as a hobby, going into the industry, seeing how it works, seeing how different people operate in the film industry is very important to understand before you kind of choose it as your major. So I know a lot of people who enjoy filmmaking and who do it as a hobby, but I don't think they could ever do it in the industry because the industry is very intense. It requires a lot of like dedication from your part in the sense of it's very different than a normal job. And I think like you really need to be passionate about film to like really survive in the industry and make it in the industry.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Okay, yeah, very interesting. Again, quick personal example which I'll share here, which might actually be useful. And I think this is actually more specific to the arts. So I'm very much into writing. I'm a published author. I'm very much into like fiction, poetry.
right.
Um, but again, 11th, 12th grade, I made a decision that this is not what I'm going to do in college. I
Yeah,
don't want to be a full-time writer because I think my literature classes in maybe 11th and 12th grade sort of ruined the relationship with writing in that I didn't want to formally study it and analyze it and
yeah,
learn every aspect of it. I wanted to for it to just be a hobby and a passion, something I do on like a Sunday morning when I
yeah,
feel like it. For many people, it's like that. So that could be visual art for some people, or painting, or even filmmaking. I have people who do like very technical work, and then they're filmmakers on the side, and that's how they like to keep it.
yeah.
So there's a big difference in actually like doing that full time, studying the in-depth technicalities of the craft, and then getting into it. Um,
Yeah. I think what you're saying is very applicable in the sense of I know that sometimes you like to just keep things hobbies and making it a career kind of ruins your personal relationship with it, especially when you're coming into like an arts field where everything is very creative and you're kind of wanted to do different things every day. It's not one formula applies to all and you're thinking differently every day. I think it does require a lot of like your personal connect to it, and I think it shows in your work. Like if say there's a podcast or a project that I'm really attached to, I think it will show in the results. And versus like if there's something that I'm really not interested in, it's just like something in the back of my head, it will again show in the results. So I think art is something like that. So it's really important that you have like a personal connect with it and you actually feel inspired every day to kind of create differently. Maybe some people choose to kind of do it as something very personal and something that's just yours and it's not to share to the world, because again that's something that is also very daunting about the industry, is that you're putting your stories out there for the world to watch, the world to give opinions on. It's not just your work, right? In the end of the day, it becomes something that you're sharing with the world. You kind of need to understand the impact of it in a larger scale. So I think there are a lot of different things that kind of come when you're doing it as a career versus when you're doing it as a hobby.
okay, can I push you a bit here? Hmm. So again, I'm taking my case, and then we'll sort of compare it with your case. Um, I am very personally connected to writing. Like it's a passion. Um, I do have like a lot of emotions and attachment and creativity that goes in. Plus, I enjoy sharing my writing with the world, and so it's published. And I like sharing it online. Still, there was something in me, and I think I'm not able to actually place a finger on it at the moment, as to why I didn't pursue it as a major in college. So these are like the three ingredients which I had. Still, I'm not doing like a literature or a creative writing major in college. Is there anything different about your case because you're doing a film major in college? Any like missing ingredient?
I think in the end of the day, for me, it's not just about the craft or enjoying it. Something that really kind of inspires me on times like that I feel stuck or I'm like, maybe this isn't what it should be for me. In every project that I think if you take up examples of what I'm doing in my life, it's all with the intention to kind of inspire people, help people. And I think filmmaking in that sense is very much that for me as well. It's a way to kind of share stories with the world, to inspire the world, to change the world in whatever way I can, with whatever little I can. And I think that's something that's very key to me as a person. So I think whatever project I do kind of just stems from that. So maybe like my whole passion of making films is one thing, and maybe it could have been a hobby. But the whole fact that I think it's a tool to kind of change the world in whatever little way, because I do think films are very influential. And I think that is something that really pushes me to, or really pushed me to kind of choose that as a career versus a hobby. So maybe something along that. I don't know. It's very different for everyone. It's hard to be like these are the three ingredients and
Yeah.
is this how the route I'll take. It's very hard to kind of pinpoint like that. I think it's just something that comes from within. Is it your passion? Is it something that will fulfill you? So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's been a lot of economics for me. I've used one of the podcast also. And that's a good call out in terms of like trying to put things in a box and trying to put formulas and like this plus this plus this is equals this.
Yeah.
I feel like, and maybe this is even more the arts than like other majors in college. I think it becomes very subjective as to like your personal
Yeah.
emotional connect with something.
Yeah.
You want to like then study that in college.
Yeah.
I think I feel like this tangent will continue, but I'll push it to later in the episode. I want to actually get back, and what I want to do is rewind in time, get to high school days. So high school, Ananya, grade 11, 12, you sort of had an inclination that you wanted to do film in college. First question, maybe this is relevant to a lot of students listening. Film and the arts generally, I'm not sure if like friends, family, anyone else sort of dissuaded you from doing that and was like, do a more traditional major, do something more lucrative, get into a different field. You can keep this on the side, do a minor. Was there any sort of difficulty in terms of convincing anyone that this is what I want to do in college?
Um, I think something that I've been blessed with was that my parents are quite supportive of everything that I want to do. My mom is interior designer herself, so I think like that also helps in the terms of like my family kind of is very used to the fact that creative jobs can get money. Like if you think about it, I think a lot of families when you're the first, maybe the first generation to kind of experiment with these jobs. I know a lot of my friends who are at UAL who've had a lot of trouble convincing their parents. I know someone who has told their parents they're doing something completely different and are doing an arts degree right now. So I think a big part of it, yes, I think there is a lot of awareness that needs to be brought in that sense of like, there's a lot of like what's the word like stereotypes around maybe arts degrees and how maybe someone not smart is the only person who will pursue it or that it doesn't bring a lot of money. There are a lot of like different things that you've probably heard about arts degrees, and I feel like that's why it's not as commonly chosen maybe. I think, yes, that like for someone who is interested in arts major and maybe comes from a family that's not very used to hearing these things as jobs, it can be a little bit hard to convince your parents and
Hmm.
really make them understand why you're going for something like this in the first place. But I think that's something that only with time will be solved. I think with the more people talking about this more openly, the more people sharing their stories, hopefully in some way we make a difference in that sense and more people are accepting to their children's dreams.
I love it. I mentioned this to you when we first spoke that fortunately, unfortunately, my entire network of friends is either STEM or business econ, very traditional majors, which
Yeah.
is perfectly fine. I think those are great majors if you're
Yeah,
passionate about them.
for
Um,
sure.
I'm really trying to diversify the majors I'm getting on the podcast, which has turned out to be surprisingly difficult, no matter who I'm
Yeah.
connected with.
Yeah.
Finding someone like a film major, I had a music major in the college. That was like a huge, like, wow, I didn't expect this to happen for me. So just want to like share that a big goal of mine on the podcast. I would love to get more arts majors. I
Yeah.
would love to get more non-traditional majors in, just so like people are exposed that something like this exists. Like if you're
Yeah.
never even exposed to like African American studies is something you can do in college, how are you
Yeah.
going to go about like convincing your parents that this is the field you're interested in?
Yeah.
So I'm sure that your episode and this might actually be an example and inspiration to listeners, and I'm very happy if it is. Um,
I think just to add to that, that was maybe like one of the main reasons that I think I even started my podcast in the first place was, again, I was saying like inspiring people to chase their dreams. And I think a lot of people that I spoke to around me, and maybe they wanted to do something completely different and they ended up doing something very different because their parents told them. And that, I think, in a way, it breaks my heart a little because I think it's so important that whatever you choose to do, it's something you're doing for the rest of your life. It's something that you're going to be living day in and day out. And I think it's something that should be very personal to you and something you should feel a connect to. And I know that, like, I've had some people on my podcast. There was one person in particular I wanted to. I'll just share like a quick small story if you don't mind.
Sure, sure.
So yeah, he is a crochet artist, and there are a lot of stereotypes around like a male being a crochet artist, right? So his like he spoke about how his family kind of kicked him out of his house and how he kind of established himself to a point and then kind of started integrating with his family again. But he still says that they don't accept him fully for what he does, and they still think it's not a real job. But I think the fact that he's kind of monetizing it now helps them accept it a bit more, which
Mm.
is sad, but I think it's a reality in terms of once you're able to kind of bring like a monetization or something. I think more people would be like, oh, okay, it does bring money. It can actually sustain you. So yeah.
Okay. I'm remembering the conversation I had with the music major. Something very similar he said, which was like two things. One, show them a very clear path. This might change slightly, but like show them a clear path as to what like in his case, a music major would lead to after graduation in terms of careers and jobs. And number two, like actually show them data on like how this is a lucrative industry. They can make money. These are the five different ways that he can make money with a music skill set. That is very crucial.
Yeah.
Um,
I think if your parents are really analytical in nature, then that's a very good approach. Depending on like how whatever their mindset is, I think
uh,
use that to help you talk to them about your dreams. And like in the end of the day, your parents just want the best for you. Like I think that's something to keep in mind
yeah.
because sometimes these things ruin relationship with your parents and like it brings a lot of like bitterness in the equation. But I think in the end of the day, if you just kind of remember that they want what's best for you, so even if you want to do something very different, it's not about convincing them, but really showing them like you're passionate about it, and working on like if they're analytical, show them like ways that this is an actual industry. If they're worried about a certain aspect, like really hear them out. I think a conversation is something that's very essential, like in terms of if you're struggling with convincing your parents, if you want to do a film degree, sit them down, ask them, why do you not think I can do this? What are your hesitations? Is it that you don't think I'll make enough money? Is it that you don't know if I'll have a stable life, a stable job? Tell me, like really hear out their concerns. And I think work backwards from there.
I think we've gone on this conversation, we've gone on this tangent very long, but maybe if I'll give you a chance to wrap it up. Again, if someone listening is wanting to an arts major, their parents are making it difficult for them. You've already given us a few strategies or tips and tricks. Any final thoughts on like what they can be doing to sort of also protect the relationship, also go into that arts major?
I think if you are in this situation, yes, it's really shitty, but it's also a great way to actually see how passionate you are about what you are doing. I think it's a good way to look at it.
Hmm.
And I think that will really test your relationship, not only with your parents, not only with the way you communicate with them, but also with your own passion. Is it something that you'll fight till the end of the world for?
Hmm.
Yeah.
We've sort of gone into why film and television, your journey with it, how you went from like just being a what is it, cinephile, to someone who actually wants to make films and now is pursuing that at university. So we have some idea there. Let's talk about London specifically. The few people I know who are doing film, either they're in Mumbai or they're in LA. And so versus cities like LA or New York City or Mumbai or any other city in the world, was there a specific thing that attracted you to go and study film in London specifically?
I think that's more related to just like my dream as a kid. I always just wanted to study in London. It was just something that was there in the back of my head always. And then I think as I grew up and once I started like narrowing it down and actually searching for universities, I did look at Mumbai as a big option because I am from India. I've grown up in a place called Kunur, which is in the south of India. So I think Mumbai would be like the closest option to me. Um, so I did a few internships in Mumbai and I spoke to directors, people on the AD team, like a lot of people on the teams about like where are the people on their team from? Have they actually had any formal education? Where
Hmm.
have they studied?
Hmm.
Just to understand like in terms of coming out of uni, do you get a job in these places? Like how does it work? And I think a lot of people that I spoke to kind of said, do not study in Mumbai. That was something that I did hear. Just because of, I think, the film schools there, while they're great in terms of like you can work in the Bollywood industry and like side by side make a lot of contacts, I think they don't have enough facilities, and they again follow a very traditional form of education where you have like classes 9 to 5. That's something that I think when you're doing something like film, it can be a disadvantage because you're not actually spending a lot of time making the films, but you're spending more time learning the camera side of things, the mic side of things, like whatever it is. Like you're spending a lot of time learning on the technical aspects, which is very important, but you're not actually using those skills and making films and
Mm.
kind of using the equipment. So that's something that I heard a lot. And I think Mumbai was my first option to start off with because it was the most accessible. It was the closest to my family, like just in terms of all that. I think Mumbai was the first option. But then after hearing all this, I was like, okay, maybe not Mumbai. And I started looking for film schools outside of India.
Okay.
And I actually spoke to a few people who had studied in London and they were working in the same company that I was interning at. And they were just telling me their overall experience at the film school there. And it sounded so amazing in terms of, I think it actually sounded like they were making films. And I think that's all I wanted to do at that point because I didn't have the resources to do it before. Obviously, I had made like a few films with my own like whatever equipment I had, but I think it just sounded like a dream to go to a film school and actually be around people who are also passionate about film to make films every day. So I think at that point that sounded like a dream, and I think I started researching more about the unis that they had mentioned, and then UAL came up. And yeah, I think I really liked everything, the whole curriculum. There were a few courses that I was kind of in between, and I think I had like this, there was a uni advice session, which I signed up for. And then I spoke to the people from UAL, and I think they guided me quite well in terms of what course to pick and how to go about the process of applying. So I think that was really helpful.
You can feel free to keep this as a yes or no answer, or if you want to say a bit more, we can go a bit in depth. You're saying that even if someone wants to get into Bollywood post graduation, it still is a pretty good idea if it's feasible financially, homesickness, whatever else. If it's possible to actually go abroad, get that abroad exposure because of things like flexibility of the classes, and then after the 4 years, actually come back and sort of deep dive into the Bollywood industry. Am I capturing that?
Yes and no. I think there are two sides of it. So if you want me to elaborate, I can. I think for sure, like going abroad is a very different experience in terms of how you learn things because everything is very different in terms of. I remember like so I did ICSE until my 10th grade. I did IB and then I went abroad. And I think everything is very different. So I don't think there's one answer that fits all again. But I do think if you have the option, it'll be great to go abroad, get those skills, and come back. That's something that I'm still contemplating because I think the way of working in India and abroad is very different. So if you're very sure that you want to work in Bollywood, maybe considering Bombay as an option is also like very nice because you get to kind of build that network in terms of you're in film school, you're kind of working according to the Indian film industry, and then you're also building the network alongside. So that could be a great option. But something else that could be a great option is going abroad, studying, getting those skills, learning very differently in terms of because you're learning from a very different approach of how different industries work, and then bringing those learnings back to India and incorporating it in the Indian film industry. So I think you can do both. It's just something in terms of what do you want to do, what do you feel comfortable doing, what is something that's feasible for you. So yeah.
Okay. Again, very subjective. Yes and no.
Yes.
I appreciate when like sometimes I try to box in answers, generalize, but I love when people say that no, no, it's very, very subjective. I really think it's based on each person's case. Um,
Yeah.
let's talk about the US for a moment. We didn't touch too much on that. Why are you not in LA or New York City? Why are you in London? Any specific factors that like didn't make you consider or want to go to the US?
I think at the beginning, US was something I was looking at as well. But I think in terms of just like if you take it as simply as I think UAL was something I really wanted to do, like a uni I really wanted to go to. And I think that was one of the reasons that London sounded so appealing to me. It was because of the uni, as well as I think London was just some like a place that I saw myself in a lot more than like a place like New York, per se. Just I think personally, I felt a lot more inclined to going towards London. I also felt like it would be a good in between spot in terms of it's not too far away. Time difference is not a lot. Even though I'm shifting, like, from India, I think that was something that just gave me a lot of comfort in my head. So I think that's why I went for London over US. There was no like technical reason as such, but I think just personally that felt more right in the moment. So yeah.
Well, I mean, you save yourself a 20-hour flight, which my
Yeah.
friends uh, go through Hyderabad to LA every time
Yeah.
they come back home. That is sort of, and the jet lag. So in a lot of senses, I get where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Now that you sort of, it's very clear that you're very passionate about UAL, and there was something specific that was really pulling you from the perspective of someone listening, maybe even an interested student. Let's talk about specific pull factors or specific USPs. Why UAL? I won't pretend I'm super well researched here, but I'm sure there are other great film schools in London. Why UAL over those other schools?
So something that's very specific to film is there are two types of unis that you could go to. You could either go to an arts school or you could go to a film school. And film schools are like smaller, very focused on film, and everyone in your uni is doing film, right? And you have a lot of creative people in UAL, not specifically doing film. Everyone's kind of doing different things. So that was one of the first things that I had to tackle in terms of did I want to go to film school or did I want to go to an art school? And because I felt more inclined to go to an art school because I thought it gives me more exposure to a lot more things. And I'm someone who's interested in like graphic design. I'm interested in product design. I felt like that would be a better place for me in terms of I felt like I could learn a lot. I would build a better network of not just film students, but more creative people. And I think that was something that I wanted to do. So that's why I picked an art school. UAL is obviously like the USP of it. One of it was like the ranking was really high. And it's considered, I think, the first or second best art school in the world. So according to like some kind of ranking. So obviously like that seemed very appealing. But again, I think personally ranking was not just what mattered to me. I think in the end of the day, it was quality of life. I wanted to hear from different students because I know that while there are a lot of unis that might have a really good ranking, quality of life in that uni or
Hmm.
how much someone enjoys their course on that uni, I think that was very important to me. And I think in the beginning when I was researching unis, I went for this open day for UAL. So they had like a lot of their teachers talking. They had some students coming and like talking about their experience. And I think that was something that really pulled me because I heard from students how they actually felt at UAL. And it wasn't like, obviously it was by UAL. So I think I was kind of skeptical in terms of are they shaping the experience to be like something different than what it is. But I think during the conversation, they also shared like downsides of something that they might have had difficulties with. So it felt quite honest and raw. And I think for me, that was something that really pulled me in because I was like, okay, it seems like a good uni. Yes, it has good facilities. There might be 10 other unis that have those facilities. But I think what drew me in was that everyone that I spoke to, I think through Facebook groups, I spoke to some people. Everyone I spoke to seemed to really enjoy their course and seemed to really like UAL. And I think coming out of uni, it's quite rare that you actually like your uni and you actually like appreciate what happened in uni. So I think, yeah, like I think that was the biggest factor that pulled me into UL. Obviously, like the location was something else. It was located in central London. And because I'm doing film, being in like a bigger city is the place to be for me in terms of networking, because networking is very important. So I think London was the perfect place in terms of building that connection. So I think being in central London was something that really attracted me to UL as well.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel like, and I won't sort of go beyond our current example, but I feel like there are some majors where it's very important to actually be in a big city over, like, let's say, a college town. I think film is one of those just because of networking. I'm sure, I'm assuming your course also involves some aspect of the city and you might go out and shoot in the city, or you might actually integrate with the city versus like someone who's, let's say, just in a textbook doing something more theoretical. Maybe it's okay for them to be in like a college town. But I'm glad you actually made the distinction. Let's expand a bit more on sort of this distinction between art schools and film schools. And so I'm sure both have their list of pros and cons. You started you started our list by saying that pro number one of like an art school is that you have exposure to like cross domain, different majors that potentially is useful in the future in terms of network and like professional growth. Do you want to add anything to to this pros and cons list of like either art schools or film schools? Sort of
Yeah, sure. So I think another distinction would be when I went into filmmaking, I think I knew I wanted to do filmmaking, but I didn't necessarily know what part of filmmaking I wanted to specialize in because I wanted to experiment with like a little bit directing, a little bit screenwriting, a little bit production. Obviously, I had like an inclination towards a certain thing, but I wasn't fully sure. I wanted to kind of give myself film school as an experience to experiment with different things. And I think what my course does beautifully is that I have done every role, I have been part of everything, but I've also gotten a chance to specialize in what I'm going to do now, which is production.
like.
So I think in a film school, if you kind of go in, I think it's helpful if you have like a very specific vision of I just want to do screenwriting. I think a film school works better. If you want to experiment a bit more, I think art school works better. And other thing would be, I think, just the whole aspect of at UAL, for example, because it's an art school and they have a lot more majors. We have like a lot of units which are in collaboration with other majors, which in a film school, everyone kind of does it internally within the course. So I
Mhm.
think just those little aspects of meeting people from different creative backgrounds really excited me personally. But I know a lot of people who would prefer to do like a traditional film school because it's very like focused and it's like everyone around you loves film and that's why they're there, which is also good in its own way. So yeah.
Hmm. So basically, you're saying like, and this is generally at an art school, film is taught more like you begin by learning everything. So it's like jack of all trades, and then you get into specializing maybe like 1 or 2 years down the line. Film school, mostly you sort of begin with sort of this one specialty. And so like you spend 3 years doing just screenwriting. Would you say that's
Yeah.
fair?
Yes, it also depends on the country you're studying in. It depends on the course you're doing. So I think there are some aspects, but I think as like a general thing, you could say, yeah, it's more specialized in terms of what specific role of film you want to do.
Hmm. Again, the last thing you said in terms of cross domain, collaborating with like other fields of study with your film major, that was very interesting to me. Let's actually bring that one level more micro and talk some specifics there. Any specific examples you can give of like how your film class collaborated with like other art domains and whether that was useful to you in terms of like how you view filmmaking?
Yeah, I think something that I want to add before that is just how, like, maybe a project works. Because I think if I explain that, it'll be easier for me to explain how the collaboration works. So let me give you an example of the last unit we did was called the drama unit, which basically means that we, like, students on the course wrote 10 different scripts, which, I mean, I think everyone wrote a script actually, and then 10 got shortlisted. So we made 10 films in the end of it. And each writer then like hired their own director, their own producer. So it kind of worked like the industry where you hire different people and then you kind of shortlist who you want. So we kind of did that where we hired each other on the course itself, and it was a good experience in terms of learning how the industry works. So everyone kind of hired each other and then they hired their own teams, and we had 10 different film crews at the end of the semester. So in terms of how we would collaborate in that unit for per se is, say, if we wanted like a title sequence for one of the films, maybe the producer, the director would sit with someone from like a graphic design course and actually help them in terms of making that sequence. So there are a lot of like crossovers in these ways. Also, in terms of, I think we got some people from the fashion course to come and help in terms of costumes. And I think it just helps because film is quite a collaborative medium, I would say. It's not something that you can do by yourself. I think you need to have people who are specialized in different things to kind of make a film a reality. So I think that way collaboration really helps.
Hmm. If you were to add to that list of like, again, very broadly, someone who's graduating from college with a film major, collaboration, as you said, is very high up on the list. Any other few skills you want to add to that list in terms of you should have this as a film major after you've graduated?
I think communication is definitely on top. I think that's something that we talk about a lot on our course, our professors talk about, because since film is a very collaborative medium, you need to be able to communicate your ideas quite effectively. You need to be able to work in a team environment and also conflict resolve, like being able to resolve your conflicts in a very effective manner because you're working with the same film crew. There are, because film is quite personal, I think everyone has like a very like like set opinion of this is how I want it to look or this is what I want. And I think you kind of clash with a lot of people in the process, and what you learn along the way is talking things out in a very like systematic manner where you're sharing your thoughts but also being open to listening to the other person's side of the story, which I think the second part is something that a lot of people don't do. Where you give your opinion, and I think it's equally important to hear back. Communication is not just about talking but also about listening to the other person.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think that's something that is also quite high up on the skill list. Also leadership, I think being able to have good relationships with everyone on your crew and not be like a boss but also kind of have that authority as like a boss, you know what I mean? Just like an in between of being in charge but not taking control of others' creative freedom. So I think a good in between. Yeah.
Again, we've gone on a tangent. There is more to be said here. We might actually save this for a bit later. I'll rewind us back. We'll get back to high school, Ananya. I want to spend a few moments talking about the application process because there's no doubt in my mind that like my application was quite different from your application to film school specifically or to art school. Let's begin with just objectively high level overview. What were the different components of your application to film school?
So obviously, I think everyone who applies abroad has like an essay that you have to write. So in our case, it was an SOP, which is basically a statement of purpose. So why this course? And I think that's something that they just want answered in terms of why do you think you are suited for this course and why do you want to do this course? Do you see yourself being here? Just I think that's very like personal essay, which I think most courses ask for. An additional like requirement for us, obviously, like you have your grades and everything that's submitted. You have your extracurriculars. You have like all your projects that you've done, like all of that submitted. But something that we had as an additional component was our portfolio, which basically means like all the films that you've created, the process of all the films, how did you kind of come up with the idea, just so that they know in terms of are you passionate about it? What is your skill level in terms of how adept you are with like different softwares? What do you know about filmmaking already? Do you have any experience in any component? So yeah, the portfolio was kind of the additional component for us.
That's intense. So apart from what like anyone else is doing, you're also doing a portfolio.
Yeah.
So kudos to you guys. That's a lot of work. And I'm sure like the application is maybe something you can start a few months earlier. I'm guessing if you do that with the portfolio, it doesn't come out as high quality. And so I'm assuming you started your portfolio like a few years before, maybe 11th, 10th.
Yeah, I think what happened was I was doing IB for my 11th and 12th, which basically meant that and like I had selected visual arts. So I had a portfolio for visual arts as well. And I also had a portfolio for college. And you're not allowed to use the same things that you use for your visual arts portfolio. So I think that was double the amount of work for me. So it was quite stressful, but I think what helped was that I had done a few internships. I had done a few film competitions in my school. Like we had represented our school, and like we had won a few. So like I think all those things in like combination helped with making it less stressful. But obviously I did have to plan out like a few films that I did independently and submitted that. Yeah, so I think planning is something that's very important for applications. I would say plan it in advance. I know it's kind of daunting to start, and I think that's why a lot of people procrastinated because they want it to be so high quality that they just like, we'll do it later, we'll do it when I feel more like clear in my head. But I think I always say this, and the start is like the hardest part, but I think you just have to do it, and you just like if you start earlier you're kind of at an advantage because you're just saving yourself stress in the future. So yeah, I think something that I would definitely recommend to people out there is starting your applications as soon as possible.
Hmm. Before we dive into a few more application tips and tricks and strategies, which I definitely will like pick your brain on a bit more, I'll get us back. You said you have to like submit a certain amount of like films, and so these have to be like short films or maybe animation, but there has to be like a certain amount you submit as part of your portfolio. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, there is a certain amount, but you can also, I think the more that you submit, the more you're at an advantage. And plus, what people like seeing is not just the final product of the film itself. This is something that I think I say to all creative majors is include your process in your portfolio. Don't just include your final product. People are very interested to see how you came up with the idea. How did you start? What were the difficulties you faced? Did you change anything along the way? People are really interested in that. So document that process. And I think that will put you at a higher edge than someone who's just submitting really good quality films, because no one really knows what went through their brain when they were making those films. I think it really helps seeing someone's creative process. So I think that's another tip that I would give people.
And the documentation is a mix of like just writing, like this is what was going on in my head, plus I'm assuming a few evidences of like early photographs or early other evidences.
Yeah, so I think like something that you could include, like for example, just in specific to film, you could include your initial drafts of the screenplay. You could include storyboards. You could include prop documents. You could include camera plans. You could include how you kind of went about finding your crew, maybe like tapes from your actors if you do any like audition tapes from them. Just little things like that I think really put you at an edge because they see how you understand each part of the process of making a film.
Okay. Even if someone hypothetically wants to be a screenwriter, and so like I'm not at all into the camera or the directing or anything, I just am a great writer. Can I just submit like 10, 15 different screenplays and not any films?
I think I've heard people do that as well, but because my course is quite broad, I think they prefer people who are a little bit interested in everything. But if you are someone who's just interested in one aspect, maybe like a screenwriting course is better for you because people will really appreciate like all those scripts that you will submit in terms of just being very specific with your portfolio. So I think, yeah, depending on the course you apply for, it's very important to understand that your portfolio kind of is very fitted to your course.
Hmm. I think we've already, in fact, covered like three or four tips and tricks through the different questions. But sort of, I want to officially ask, in case you have any last things to share, any final, in case someone listening is currently working on their film school application, their portfolio, any final pieces of advice?
I think firstly, I'd just like to say you got this and like you can do it, because I think sometimes you just need to hear that because there's so much going on, especially when you're in high school. You're kind of focusing on your exams or your projects for high school, but you're also focusing on your next step, which is college applications, your portfolio. There's just a lot happening. But I think time management is something that is very key. I think more important than anything is how you manage your time, because in the end of the day, you want to produce a good quality portfolio. And I think a lot of that ties in with not being stressed and being able to do your best. And that ties back to time management. So I think managing your time well and really, I used to use a lot of planners, like when I was that age. I think that was like the reason I started getting into planning a lot. I would use like a lot of daily planners. I would plan every single aspect of my life. And I think I still kind of do that till date. It's something that I've learned. And that's a skill that I think is very important, managing your time well. And I think you don't get like daily planners, really understand how your day will look like. Try to like give the most important tasks like priority, time block, like just maybe you tell yourself, I have 1 hour to work on this, and then I work on this 1 hour. So I think time blocking, planning your time, planning your day, those are really important in terms of skills that you will even use in your future, but it will also save you a lot of stress during applications.
Hmm. Awesome. And this works for me. It need not work for everybody. I always like to do the hardest or the most creative or the most challenging or the most ambiguous tasks first thing in the day and then slowly make it easier from there. And so the end of the day is more like very straightforward tasks, especially for a creative person. And this works for me again. My creation will be in the morning and my like content consumption will be in the evening. And so let's say I'm podcasting, I like to do the podcast in the morning and then I like to
Yeah.
do that's in the evening to sort of get inspiration or tips and tricks. That could work. Try it out, hopefully.
That's interesting because I usually do the opposite. I usually wake up and do all my like admin tasks, the really small things that I can get out of the way really easily, so that I have like the majority of the day to focus on the bigger tasks. So I think again that works. Like I think finding your most productive time in the day is very important because you know when you're going to be the most productive and you use that time really efficiently, and the rest of the time you kind of do like your littler tasks, your smaller things that you need to do.
Hmm.
So
That
yeah.
should be as wide as like 5 a.m. for some people and like I said 2 a.m. for some people.
Yeah.
Whatever it
I know
is.
people on either sides of the spectrum. So it's like, I think just very, again, very personal to you and when you feel the most like productive. Yeah.
This is probably, at least in my mind, when I was writing the script for this episode, I thought that this would be the most challenging question of the episode. So feel free to take a few seconds to think, but I really would love to hear what you have to say here. I went and actually Googled and found specific names here, which would also be well known to people in the listing who are not into film. And so I'm going to start listing names: Quentin Tarantino, Christopher Nolan, James Cameron, David Fincher, Steven Spielberg. People would at least know two or three of these names. These are like probably some of the great filmmakers of all time. These people either did not go to college or they went to college and didn't study film specifically. And so, what are your thoughts on someone getting out of high school, maybe working on developing skills, and then getting into the industry? And what does that say about like the purpose or the motivation behind actually going through a structured film program at film school? Like, how necessary is that?
Um, it's something that I think I talk about a lot with different people. And I don't think everyone that who's doing film professionally has studied film. I don't think in any capacity film school is the only way that you can go into filmmaking with. I don't think that it's like because it's such a creative field, I think it's not like this single route that will lead you to one point. Like maybe all other degrees have that, but I think in the more creative fields, it's not very structured in that way. You don't really need to go to film school to be a good filmmaker. I definitely agree with it. I think there are advantages of people who go to film school and then come out and find a job. But I do think that someone who has a sheer passion for it can do it even without going to film school. So I do not think it's something that's necessary if it's something you're interested in. And film school is maybe something you're just not able to do. That does not, I think, say that you cannot do film in the future. I know a lot of people who have done something completely different and then switched fields like midway through life, and like been really successful in this industry as well. I think maybe some advantages of going to film school are definitely there. Like it will put you at a higher place, just maybe when you start. But I think in the end of the day, it's just all about your passion and your hard work. So I don't think it's like a one size fits all again. If it's something that you can do and something that you're interested in, I think it's a great experience in terms of just understanding how the industry works. It really gives you time to understand every single aspect of it so that like you're just not thrown into the industry and you kind of have to figure it out on your own. It makes the transition quite smooth. It teaches you skills that you will learn in the industry, but you would learn it over time. I think it teaches you that in like a fast paced version. It provides you a good network of people who are interested in film, which maybe when you come out of film school, you can kind of go back to them and like do projects with them. I know a lot of people who are opening production houses with their college classmates. So yeah, it does give you advantages, but I don't think it's something that is unachievable if you just go into the industry.
Okay, I think that was a great answer. At the same time, you sort of made a very strong case for film school, but at the same time, I think you did a great job of like there are certain types of people who can actually just get into it without going through film school. I had a very interesting conversation with a dropout on the podcast. So he finished, dropped out, building startups in San Francisco, proper tech, computer science guy. He told me, and this is true for all majors, don't go to college just for like the course content. Like go to college for different reasons, and that could be the network, that could be just social emotional learning and adulting if that's necessary, that could be professor connections, that could be like internships, industry experience. Go to college for more than just the content, because you can literally get that on YouTube or buy a few good textbooks and get that done with. So sort of being very intentional about like why am I going to college, and so like maybe this is even more true for arts degrees, is like sort of even if you can learn those skills alone through YouTube or whatever, be very intentional about like what else are you going to art school for?
Yeah.
What do you want to get out of those 3 or 4 years?
Yeah.
Um,
I think especially when I first went, like I was talking about how I studied in India all my life, and then I kind of went to uni in UK. It's so different the way that they learn, and I think in the beginning I felt like I was literally so free. I felt I was wasting my money. I felt I was wasting my time because we don't have like a structured 9 to 5 every day, which all my other friends who were in India, they had that schedule. And so I was like, what am I doing with my life? I don't have classes every day. I don't have homework every day. I don't have assignments every day. But I think it kind of took me a few months to realize that college is not just about the course. It's not just about your classes. It's what you make out of it. It's something very different in terms of you have a lot of time. So use that time effectively, use that time wisely. Don't sit around and waste your time, whether it be like building a good social life, whatever your priority is, whether it be like doing something that you've never done before, whether it be pursuing a personal project, whether it be actually sitting and expanding your skills in your degree, whatever it is that you want to use that time for. I think use that time wisely because you're never going to get that time back. And it might be very different in terms of the way it's structured, but it's structured in that way for a reason. And I think that's something that you should understand. And
Brilliant.
I wish I could go back and tell my like younger self this.
No, brilliant. I'm sure that's great for someone to hear before they jump into university. A lot of us learn this after a year, 2 years, some of us after we graduate. The earlier you can learn these lessons, the better. That's sort of why the podcast is totally for high schoolers.
Yeah.
I think they should know the perspectives of like current students and alumni. They should know the mistakes we made. They should know what we've learned along the way before they even enter the journey.
Yeah.
Um, that was an awesome section. I love talking about how you got into film, why you're in London, why you're at UAL. I'm glad we did application tips and tricks. That's probably most relevant to high schoolers listening for the moment, because the first thing is sort of getting into good film school, and then we can talk about what we do there. So that was our before university section. What we'll do now is actually fast forward in time. We'll touch upon your first 2 years at UAL, that experience. We'll talk about some specifics about film and the course. Again, this episode is like a very in-depth dive on film because you're the first film student I'm getting on the podcast. So I want to actually talk the 101s and the ABCs with you. Let's begin with an elementary question, but I'm very curious to know over the 3 years, You've done 2 years, 1 year is coming up. Over the 3 years, at a very high level, what do you actually learn? Like, what are your different subjects?
So I think this is something that's surprising to a lot of people because we don't really have, I don't know, it's hard to explain in terms of subjects because it's not English, biology, chemistry. It's very different in that way. We have something called units, which means we have different projects that we work on every semester. And we usually have like one theory class and then one project unit that we're working on. So the theory class is like we have like a theory class where we study about like like analysis of film. So we like have academic essays that we have to write, and that's quite self-explanatory. We have workshops where we learn different, like how to use different equipment. So say if it's a sound workshop, we learn how to edit sound, how to kind of use microphones, how to really optimize your sound quality in a film, how to do Foley, how to do SFX. There's a lot. So we have like different workshops that we do. So for every specific part, we have like different workshops, and then we have one major project that we're kind of working on. And usually it would be like every semester is different. So we would maybe do a documentary one semester, a TV show one semester, a short film one semester. So it's very different every semester. But in each of these projects, you kind of take up one role. So you're not recommended to do everything. You're recommended to do one major role and one minor role. So that would be like if you want to do direction, you would do direction and maybe like props as your minor role. So you're kind of specializing in that, but at the same time, because of the workshops, you're kind of learning a bit of everything. So yeah, that's I think like the very basic overview of how the course works.
Hmm. Let's talk a bit about London and let's talk a bit about how London relates to your course. And so let's say you have a practical class, you're shooting a film. Do you actually get out into the city and shoot and use the city? How does that actually work? Like, how is London integrated?
So yeah, like I mentioned that we have different projects every semester. And I think depending on the project, it's, for example, the documentary was quite location heavy. So we were all assigned different boroughs of London, which means different parts of London, and we all kind of had to go explore and find a story that we wanted to make a documentary about in that borough. So in that way, I think you find stories from like people around you, and I think I think it's not really specific to London in this example. I think you can find stories in any place around you. So yeah, this is like just a small example of how we would probably get into the city and shoot. Also, like a lot of our drama shoots have like a 1 day location, 1 day studio arrangement. So we do kind of get out and shoot a lot. Yeah, so I think you do interact with London in that way quite a bit.
I think in that sense, it makes a lot of sense to me that you're in a big city because sort of a lot is just happening. And so there's like so many potential stories to tell. You walk down the street and there's like 10 stories happening around you. I think that's another big argument for like being in a happening place. And that could be anywhere, especially for an arts degree like you, where the inspiration is literally like the outside world for a major part. Um,
Yeah.
Let's talk a bit about your film professors. I'm super curious. What type of people are they? Are they like academics, or are they the proper filmmakers who are then like coming and taking an academic role? What is the student-professor relationship like? Is it similar to like how, like for me, the professor is more just like an intellectual thought partner, someone who lands me opportunities? What's your relationship with your film professors like?
So I think there are two sides. So we do have like academic, like people who are very into the academic side of films, people who are very into writing, and like just really adept in that side of things. And I think they're the ones who do the theory classes, and they are kind of leading those units, which is very similar to like they are my intellectual counterpart in the sense of I can discuss ideas with them. We can kind of bounce off ideas. The other side of the film professors in my uni are filmmakers themselves. So the people who are kind of leading the ones which are very practical, where we are actually going out and making films, where we are doing the workshops. They're all people who have a lot of experience in that field. So, for example, if I'm talking about my cinematography teacher or something, he has definitely done a lot of like projects in the past with different film production houses around the world, doing that role, and he's kind of now come back and he's teaching us how to do that and what he's learned along the years. So I think it's quite different in that way. In terms of coming back to your question about like relationships with the professors, they are all very, very chill. And I think that's something, I don't know if it's just in specific to my film course, but I think my professors somehow are like very, very chill compared to like all my other friends' professors. And they kind of want to have that personal relationship with you because I think when you're working on a film set together for so many hours, when you're doing so many different things together, when you're kind of coming up with ideas, you do tend to share a lot of personal experience. So I feel like I know my professor's personal life and not only professional life, which is something that is very uncommon in terms of your relationship with a professor. I think like people find it very interesting when I just come up and I'm like, yeah, my professor told me that he went through like this divorce and this was his experience with it. And like that's something that you usually never hear about when it comes to your professors. So I think in that way, your relationship is quite different because you're kind of your whole purpose there is to share stories, and you do end up sharing a lot of like personal stories from your life. Whether it be like I know one of my professors used to do drugs and now he's like how he came out of it, like I know those details about them, which is very uncommon. But I think just because it's a film course, we do end up talking about a lot of like different films, different stories, personal experiences, and I think those things just sort of come out.
That's actually very important. I think developing the more personal relationship with the professor, especially if long term you see the collaboration continuing beyond just school. I'm glad that like through your course, like you sort of have it. It's easier for you in that you're anyway sharing stories. I would say for someone listening who's let's say getting into a more traditional major, a STEM or a business econ, I think office hours is actually the place to do more personal conversations with professors. And so maybe in class, it's more of an intellectual professional relationship, one-on-one conversations, coffee, meals, walking with them, office hours. That's actually the place to ask them about sort of their personal lives. And when they open up about that, that vulnerability, I think that's what actually like bonds student and professor very well.
For sure.
Even
I
with
think like your relationship with your professor is very important no matter what degree you're doing, no matter what you're studying, no matter who they are. I think it's very important because even if it doesn't get you a placement in the future, it will help you learn things in a very different way because think of your like professors as just walking talking knowledge, right? You want to like get the most of them and like understand them completely. Yeah.
before we get into your plan after graduation, which I'm very excited to hear about, and before we dive into our fast fire, one question I want to ask you here, beyond sort of what's going on at UAL and film school, is, and I'm sure this is true, very, very true for art majors, even pretty true for like any degree, is sort of building your skills and doing personal projects outside of your course and outside of what you're learning, outside of your class requirements. What are some of those personal projects or those skill building activities that you're engaging in outside of class?
So I think two projects that I hold quite like close to my heart. One is like the podcast that I started. It's definitely taught me a lot in terms of skills. I think something that I don't know if I've touched on, but I'll get into like a little bit of why I started it. I think, yeah, again, it was a lot to do with people being unhappy with what they picked and just going into fields with not enough information. Maybe they didn't have the facilities to learn about it. But I think that's something I would have wished that I heard a lot more stories because, especially going into a field like filmmaking where it's not quite accessible to talk to a director very easily. Like it's just something that's not possible all the time. I think I had like a privilege of talking to a few, and that was like the most valuable learning in terms of before I went into film. That was the most helpful part for me was talking to those people. So I think just sharing more stories of people who are doing such different things, who people who are doing such great things, and just sharing that inspiration was something that I really wanted to do because I think that's something I would have wished I had. Um, like I also cover episodes on stuff like what you do about like the uni transition because I think that's something again which a lot of people don't talk about necessarily, and I think it's so helpful to have that little like someone who's done that and spoken about it. And I think that's why I even mentioned like talking to someone who had graduated from UL was so helpful for me, just because hearing personal experience for me is always something that will push me, whether it be to do like something that I'm really inspired to do, or just to like achieve something, just in terms of very small life decisions. Also, I think just hearing personal experience is something very integral to me. So I think that was why I started the podcast. And the second project that I wanted to touch on was my small business. So I had mentioned on the podcast that I was really interested in design. And so I started this business in like 2020, where I basically design the products, sell them, and then give 20% of the profits to NGOs. So I think the reason that I thought of that in the first place was I used to always like kind of wonder how I can use my skills to benefit society as like a large, which is some like a common theme that I've spoken about in all my projects. It's something that I think instinctively that's something that just comes out. So I think like I wanted to really do design, and I really wanted to incorporate that as like a hobby, a side business, a side hustle. Even though I wasn't doing it as like a major, I wanted to continue doing that. So I think that's just something that everyone can like learn from, in terms of you don't really need to do something as your major to continue doing it in life. So if there's something you're interested in, something that you're passionate about, if you're not able to do it as like a full-time degree, like there's always a way to make it feasible in terms of doing it as a side hustle, doing it as something on the side. So I think that's how I started Innovatory. And yeah, like this is just like a really quick rundown of it. But yeah, these are two projects that I wanted to touch on.
Wow. It's insane that you have the time for like the podcast, the business, film school, 100 other things. That's kind of inspirational in and of itself. Um, Two quick things I want to say here. First, and this is absolutely not to flatter you, but if I had listened to, let's say, your episode and maybe two or three other episodes when I was in like ninth or 10th grade, there's like a 5% chance I might actually have been doing like a film major in college now, and that my life path would have been completely different. A huge motivation of starting the podcast, I've said this again and again, is that there are so many things I wish someone had told me before I jumped into
Yeah,
university. There are so many things we learn like in third year or fourth year, and like why can't we know that before freshman year? That's the
yeah,
whole podcast. And number two, if anybody enjoyed the episode with Ash, who's doing history at KCL, and if you want to like sort of listen to a more personal, more fun fitness side of his story, that's on your podcast, The Daily Dose of A. That's
yeah,
a cool like
yeah,
fitness episode. So that's
yeah,
just about to Ash, who's actually how we both connected. Let's
yes.
talk about your plan after graduation. What do you see yourself doing after graduation? And also, what I'm curious to hear about here is how you've managed to go from this broader field of film and like narrowly focus down on production specifically, and that's what you want to do in the future.
So I think a big part of that is actually like through my course, like I was talking about the different projects where you specialize in different roles. I think something that I wanted to do was direction when I first started. So I started doing a lot of direction roles. Then I got into production slowly, and I realized that I think I enjoyed it more. I kind of had a lot more to offer in that way. To production, I think it was just something that felt more natural to me. Direction is something that I'm still very, very passionate about, and I think maybe in the future that it is something that I would get into. But I think production to start with was something that I really want to get into. So right after college, I think that's what I want to do. I definitely want to work for a few years before thinking of any other like further education, especially in a course like film. I don't think you necessarily need to do like a master's degree even. Even I think like a college degree is, a lot of people just do it for the sake of a graduate certificate. I think it for me personally, it was a lot more just to like understand myself better. And I think that's why film school was important to me. But I think now that I kind of have like a sort of direction, I'd like to be kind of on the field a lot more. And that's why I want to start working and just getting into like different projects, trying different things. And yeah, I think that's what I want to do after graduation.
Okay, beautiful. Two questions. I will ask them, and you can actually tackle them one by one. First, for someone like me who doesn't know the ABCs, what actually is part of, like, again, a very high level, what is actually part of film production? What do you do? What is an ABC definition? And two is, if you were to, like, let's say 5 years down the line, actually go and do a master's program in film, why would that have been?
Okay. So let's start with your first question, which is what is production? I think this is something that I talk to a lot of people about because a lot of people, when you think of a producer, you think of someone just putting in the money. And obviously, I do not have that much money to produce any film. So that's not what I'm doing. I think, so let me explain. Creative production. Is kind of the overall management of a film crew. So a film crew has different components. You have your like art department, which includes your costumes, your props. You have your sound team, which includes your Foley, your FX, your SFX, your editors. You have like your video editors. You have your script writers. You have your directors. You have your camera team. So there are a lot of different teams that come into a film crew. And what a producer does is kind of oversee all the different departments and kind of make sure that they work together. So
Hmm.
it's kind of the overall thing of just making everything like putting all everyone's work together and just bringing it to life, I think, is a good way to explain what a producer is in very like short time.
Mhm.
Reason that I would go and do like a master's degree or a specialization would only be if I'm getting into something really specialized and if I find myself going into it a few times on the job and not being able to kind of understand what's happening or just certain aspects that maybe reflect and I'm like, okay, I need to really work on this better. I think that's the only reason that I would kind of go back to film school. I think it's also a great environment to just learn from different people, to bond with different people. And I think sometimes I hear a lot of people who get into like a creative rut while working. I think masters is sometimes a good break in terms of just refreshing your creative side of the brain and then coming back to work. So I think a lot of people do that as well.
Awesome. Quicker question. A few years down the line, do you sort of see yourself in Hollywood, Bollywood, or a different industry?
I think it's really hard to say right now, but I definitely do see myself coming back and contributing to Bollywood in some way, in the sense of I think going abroad, you kind of realize how Bollywood is perceived as like an industry as a whole. And I think people just associate it with dancing and singing, and that's what Bollywood is to a lot of people abroad, which is not true. There are so many different stories. I think Bollywood has so much to offer, but it's just like the narrative of, yes, it's just like the singing and dancing musical thing. And like, I think a lot of filmmakers are kind of working on changing that narrative of Bollywood is not just this. So I think that's definitely something that I want to do in the future. So I do see myself in Bollywood at some point. I'm not sure about Hollywood. So yeah, no clue where life will take me. I guess we'll just see.
Okay, okay. Awesome. We'll end the episode off on our typical exciting and fast-paced note. I've got a few quick fast-fire questions. Some are about film, some are non-film. But we'll go for it and we'll see what this brings. Number one is any one wise quote that has stuck with you over the years, inspired you, or guided you in any way.
I don't think there's any particular quote as such. Some like something that really inspires me or something that I always keep in the back of my head is like a word. It's intentionality, which means everything you do is with purpose and towards a higher goal. And I think I try to incorporate that, whether it be in personal relationships, whether it be in projects I'm doing, whether it be in like day-to-day activities. I think that's something I always like keep in the back of my head, and it makes me feel like I'm living a more fulfilled life, I think. So that's something I would like to share.
Okay, awesome. That's like our word of the day for the episode. I love it. This is I'm sure this is difficult for like any film major to answer, because you've just studied so many films and so many directors. But if I had to force you for your favorite film and your favorite film director,
I was mentioning that this is a very hard question for me and I usually can never answer, but he said that I had to answer one question, like one name. So I'm just going to say The Grand Budapest Hotel by Wes Anderson. I think, yeah, so that's the director and the film.
Perfect. Okay. Okay. Yeah, yeah. I love some Wes Anderson films. That's not sort of on my top two or three. But if someone is hearing the name for the first time, recommend checking out the director. Very like tangential and like out of the box films. Is what I'll say there. Um, Apart from your own, of course, I'm sure you're very much in love with your podcast. I hope someday you sort of also really enjoy listening to other episodes on Uni Unveiled. Apart from these two, do you have a favorite podcast?
Yes, I think I have a lot of favorite podcasts. Again, it's very hard to pick because I think I go by like my mood, like what I'm feeling. Um, I think something that I listen to in terms of inspiring me for just like very like basic life lessons, like self-confidence, things like that. It's called A Better You. I don't know if you've heard it, but I really like that podcast in terms of it's very casual and it's I think it's just about life and sometimes I just like hearing that. So yeah.
Okay, I'll check it out. I haven't heard of this one before. Um, the most interesting class you've taken at UAL thus far, like something that really blew your mind or was very fascinating.
It wasn't necessarily a class. Again, like we don't have classes per se, but this unit, the drama unit, I think I mentioned it slightly before, but that was something that blew my mind because I think we worked in a way that the industry works, and I think I learned so much from that particular unit. And I personally had like a lot of responsibility in that unit. So I think that tested me in terms of a lot of different things and just really like pushed me to do my best. So yeah.
Awesome. And last of the fast fire is we've talked a lot about what's great about UAL, pull factors, USPs. It's one of the top in the world. But I believe that every institution has another side, and that could be even a Harvard or a Stanford. And so I love to talk about that on the podcast, very brutally honest. Any one or two sort of limitations or drawbacks or flaws about your university?
Something that I think I dislike about UAL or is not necessarily my favorite is the fact that we have like a lot of campuses around London. So there is a lot of integration in my campus itself, but I don't really have a lot of links with other campuses. And I think that's something that would be really beneficial if there was more links and if there was more opportunities to kind of, yeah, collaborate with different unis as well.
There are like definitely some flaws of like a city campus, like an
Yes.
Environment Club City or like a KCL, some of those big ones in central London, which is why colleges go to like those places in the middle of nowhere to have those beautiful campuses where everyone is there. So pros and cons of everything. Um, Lastly, and this can be to completely non-film specific as well. I'm sure there are some non-film people listening to the episode. If you had to leave listeners with some final thoughts or final words, any sort of guidance or advice you want to give to someone younger than yourself about to jump into university and then get into sort of the big blue world, any final thing you want to say to them before we wrap up the episode?
I think I would just like to say that don't be afraid of like doing whatever you're passionate about, no matter how many challenges come in the way. Remember that every challenge can be seen as a learning instead of like a challenge. And just, I think everything will sort itself out. Like, even though it might seem like there's a lot going on and there's a lot on your plate right now, eventually everything will sort itself out. And there'll be a point in your life where you won't even remember how much work you were doing and like you will just remember like the fun memories of that time. So make sure to like make the most of life in general and not like stress yourself too much about anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a personal anecdote to share here if you're comfortable?
I think like before I started my podcast, if I was to sit down and think of all the things I had to do, if I was to sit and list out every single thing, if I had to list out all the responsibilities that would be added to my plate, I would have never done it. So I think just starting out and just like remembering that you're doing it for a reason, remembering that there's a higher purpose to whatever you're doing, and it's just not about like, oh, I'll have to spend 2 extra hours on the computer. I think just remembering that will help push you through everything. and just taking it as it comes and not seeing it as like an overwhelming chunk of work will help you just get started and do it instead of just thinking about it and leave it as a dream. So yeah.
Love it. I'll put a link in the description. I think for listeners, it might be interesting. I feel like a lot of like my listeners would also enjoy the content that you're creating. It's funny. I was just talking yesterday to someone, I actually said this that I said I swear to God, bro, if I knew that the podcast was going to be so much effort, I wouldn't have even done it. I would have just chilled the whole summer. I thought it would be as
Yeah.
simple having a Zoom call, recording, and then putting it up on YouTube 2, 3 hours. Um, Part one is making it, part two is also like marketing and getting traffic on. But that's the beauty, is like sometimes you start a project where you're just so passionate about it, and then you realize there's 100 things you have to do, but by then you're already like midway through and you're like, let's just do it. I'm kind of enjoying what I'm doing here. That's the beauty of it. Sometimes ignorance is actually good in that sense, not knowing everything that lies ahead. um,
Yeah, I think it's not ignorance, but more like just taking it as it comes instead of just seeing it as like, oh, I need to do so much. Just like say that, okay, I'm going to start with this. Today, I'm just going to do this much. And this is just all I need to do today. And I don't need to worry about anything else. I think that helps you like take up tasks in a more like efficient way and not be too stressed about everything.
Okay, yeah, it's a good catch. Brilliant. Well, we'll wrap up the episode before we say goodbye. Ananya, if listeners want to reach out, if they have follow-up questions, if they want to connect and just say hi or pick your brain about anything we discussed today, what's a good way to reach you?
Instagram, I think Instagram is probably the best. Do I share my handle? Like,
Perfect.
yeah, okay. So you could either reach me on my podcast page or you could reach me on my personal page. My personal page is just at Ananya Chordia, and my podcast page is at Daily Dose of A1.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Um, Thank you, Ananya. It was a very different conversation. You're the first person I've got on who's like a proper podcaster. You've been doing this a lot more than me. So after the podcast, I have to pick your brain about certain things regarding podcasting. But really enjoyed diving deep into like Film 101. I think we covered a lot of ground on the episode. What was thank you for being on Uni Unveiled. It was actually a pleasure to host you.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a lot of fun. It was really fun chat. And I hope that someone out there who listens to this podcast is inspired to do film now.
All right, that was the episode. To all the young listeners out there, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something new, and I hope you feel more energized, inspired, and curious for the exciting university journey that lies ahead. Stay tuned. Many more wonderful episodes to be released on Uni Unveiled across a diversity of majors, countries, institutions, and speaker profiles. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel Uni Unveiled. This podcast is just a small part of a much larger initiative undertaken by my family called Serene Strokes to spread positive sparks of growth, transformation, and joy among all our audience. Check out our official website www.serenestrokes.com. In the description and comments, please feel free to share other topics and questions which you would love to hear about from our different speakers on this podcast. Until then, take care and remember that this big word, university, may not be as scary or as intimidating as you think it is. Thank you for listening to Uni Unveiled.